So symbols are cluttered and confusing. So designed for hand copying, not understanding. So remember, this sheet music is basically designed for writing things out by hand from the standpoint of a piano, labeling all the lines by how many sharps or flats are in, the key that we're basically working in. And obviously a computer doesn't really use this squiggly line here or these kind of dots and whatnot. So that might be an efficient way to do it if you were writing everything, by hand, to try to make it as clean as possible to write it by hand. I still don't think it maybe not be the most efficient still, but that would be the argument. But in a computer, these symbols are not the most efficient way to write the thing for sure. And I think we're in a world at this point in time where things are going to change. It's no longer the idea that the computer engineers need to come up with some complex software program that basically converts a standard spreadsheet into sheet music by adding these funny rules and all these kind of symbols, right? That's the logic that we've been in. There's going to be a paradigm shift, right? There's going to be a paradigm shift that says, no, what we need to do is you musicians that are hooked on these weird symbols that are not the most efficient thing, you're the one that needs to change, right? You need to change that. We need to streamline the symbols to fit into the current day's world of reading, which is going to be way cleaner, which in essence looks like an Excel spreadsheet. Now, again, there's going to be resistance to this because there's this idea that this is somehow beautiful. The way we're writing this is somehow beautiful. It's like a painting. It's like artistic. And if you put it into a spreadsheet, you're like an accountant or something, right? I am an accountant, so I don't have a problem with it. But I think that's kind of like the issue, right? You can't be creative in a spreadsheet. And it's like, no, this is basically a spreadsheet already, okay? It's already a spreadsheet. We're just taking it and we're making the symbols like easy to format in a modern spreadsheet. And I think and again, it's not me. I'm not telling you this is how it is. I think this is how it is just because that's where we're at this point in time in technology. And now that we have AI to transpose things or to translate things, not even easier than language. Translating this to like a more simplified system is easier than translating Spanish to English by far, because Spanish to English is not a one-to-one rule-based system, whereas this is completely logic, rule-based system translation, simple. So dots, flats, beams, ties, slurs, accidentals, so visual noise with little geometric meaning, no built-in visualization, no interval or chord logic. In other words, this is still like a note stacking type of system. We're not really seeing the chords. There's nothing you can see them, you can determine the chords by them being stacked, but it's not really telling you, hey, look, this is a standard chord, because it's mapping out with a stacking kind of system similar to what you would see in a DAW. So we'd like to be able to compact it as well. Chords are a disaster in sheet music. So stacking is a clunky hack. Chords must be vertically stacked. So this is the same as, in essence, a DAW. So if you have a chord, then you're going to have to stack the notes on top of each other in order to represent the chord. Therefore, when I write music, I have to take more time than it would be to more easily just input the chord and stack it. And to read music, I have to understand what those stacked chords kind of look like in a pattern. It's going to take a lot more cognitive energy to read it. So notice these days we would like to be entering basically with a keyboard or with like a typewriter into the system, and it would be nice if we can take that stacking system, whether it be in a MIDI system these days or in the sheet music, and put it into one line. I would like to have one row representing a 12 note or one octave of information, which means we should be able to write at least basic chords, all the chords that are using notes within the standard 7-note collection. We should be able to write those with some kind of notation, some kind of note name, so that we can read things more clearly on like one line. That would be nice. So accidentals must be repeated for each note. Ledger lines increase clutter. Impossible to see voicing or modular logic. Now, another thing that's going to be a problem here, and remember, this wasn't a problem as much back in the day when they were making the sheet music. Why? Because they were writing everything in C major, right? Or not C major, but the major key, right? The major key was like the thing that everybody wanted to play in, and then the minor became important and so on and so forth, but they weren't really playing so much in like all the other modes. Whereas these days we are, and therefore, if you're looking at a more mode, like you're switching modes between the major, minor, but also the Dorian, the Mixolydian, the Phrygian, the Lydian, and so on and so forth, then the focus shifts. We want. It's not like I know that we're always playing in major. I want to know from a modal center, what now is the tonic? Where's the modal center that we're playing in? From a functional standpoint, it makes more sense for modern music to think in terms of modal centered logic as opposed to major scale. I'm assuming everything is in like a major scale logic unless you tell me otherwise, because not everything is in the major scale anymore, right? So if we're going to be moving around modes all the time, which we are, all modes should be equal under the law. We should be then defining things by modal center, modal logic would make more sense for today's world. So a better way, use a grid. So one octave, one row. So what we have then is this stacking. Now, if you have a DAW situation, you're still going to have this kind of stacking situation. But we would like to come up with a system where the modern software could possibly stack, or they can condense it into one row representing one octave of information. That would be useful. A modern DAW system should be able to break it out in a spreadsheet giving 12 notes for one octave, or condense it to give one row for one octave, including notations for common chords in that row. So 12 columns, 12 chromatic notes. So dots show pitches used, chords become shapes, not stacks. So when you're using a modern DAW system, you start to see the chords by the shape of the chord, which you can kind of do in sheet music as well, but it would be nicer if, again, we can condense it down, or at least have the option of condensing it down so that we can basically see one row of information. So easier to read, transpose, invert, and visualize. So grids match how computers think. So obviously this looks more kind of like what a DAW would be. Notice it's a grid. That's basically a spreadsheet. Now again, there's this weird thing, this weird idea that sheet music is, again, beautiful painting, spreadsheet is ugly capitalism or something. I don't know. But no, the spreadsheet is the way you want to go. That is the canvas that we're building on. Notice the data input that he has down here, a little bit different than the piano. So there's different ways that you could do the data input into the system. I believe that if you're just writing music, having just a 10 key like a calculator is actually a good instrument in and of itself, because you can easily play the 7 notes from the perspective of a Nashville number system on, in essence, a calculator type of system, and then assign 5 other keys for the ones outside of the 7-note collection. So we have MIDI. The numbers are 60. Now notice that the MIDI system assigns an absolute numbering system that takes into consideration octaves. That's something that's usually kind of behind the scenes, because we as learners and musicians, we typically don't want to remember that 60 is going to be basically middle C. Now, I do think that there is a numbering system that would be useful for us, for both a local numbering system and then one that spans beyond the local distance, but we'll talk more about that later. The piano roll view is going to be a grid logic. So that's going to be what we currently have at this point with a DAW system, which is obviously more efficient than the sheet music, but it's still basically taking the sheet music idea and putting it into the grid. Now you could imagine or argue that the sheet music is more efficient because you're basically using less lines by, assigning, the sharps and the flats and whatnot. But it doesn't make as much sense because obviously in reality, the distance between all the notes is the same. So it's actually more logical to have all 12 notes within the grid as we're writing. Now, what we would like to do in practice, however, is make a better indication of those notes that are going to be in the 7-note collection, because in Western music, we are typically working from the perspective of one of 12 7-note collections and then some type of modal center. So that would be something that would be the way we would normally want to be indicating something. In sheet music, you would indicate that by saying these are how many sharps and flats. And by how many sharps and flats, that would tell you which of the 12 collections of 7 notes that we are working in. So in a DAW system, you would want to actually say that. Tell the system, hey, I'm working in this 7-note collection, and this is the modal center perspective that I'm working from. And by doing that, it should help you to indicate in the 12-note collection which notes are inside and outside the key, and be able possibly to condense it so that on one row, you can write down the 7 notes that are in the collection and so on, even if you're talking about different modes, all 7 of the modal perspectives. So time on x-axis, pitch on the y-axis. So how we typically think about this is it's going to be going from left to right. That's going to be giving us the time. And then on the vertical axis, we have the pitches, meaning the notes that we're going to be playing. So that means that on the vertical axis, 1 octave is going to have 12 notes, because there's 12 notes within 1 octave, 12 rows. That's kind of a lot of rows. So it gets basically quite large. We'd like to have the option to condense that. Would be a lot easier on the eyes. Matches, sequences, sampling, and loop-based music. So AI makes sheet music obsolete. Now, again, this is something that some people, it brings them pain, right? Especially like piano players that have learned this since they were 4. You're going to be reluctant, I would think, to say, well, no, we're going to abandon sheet music. Now, I'm not saying sheet music is no one's going to use it, because you still want to like look back at the old works. If you're studying music, you want to go back and see how they made things in the past. But going forward, I don't think it's going to be the most efficient thing. And even the old works can be translated in a way that is better than translating like Latin to English, for example, because there's more of a reason to go back and read the Latin works for Rome or something like that. Why? Because it's not a one-to-one translation. All the grammar is different in Latin than it is in English. You lose stuff in translation. Not basically the case when you're talking about music, however. You don't lose as much information for music. Why? Because it's a one-to-one translation. It's not like you're using different grammar. We're using the same thing. It's just a different way of writing it. So I do think there's still usefulness to kind of go back and look at it, but I think going forward, we're just going to translate it into the most logical system going forward, because the AI can do that automatically even easier than translating a foreign language like Spanish to English or Latin to English. So real-time translation should be easy to do. Instant key changes and harmony generation. So remember, if you put this information into the current system in the most efficient way, you don't even have to rewrite it to translate it. It'll or to transpose it to all 12 collections of notes, or to rotate the modal perspective. So instant key changes and harmony generation, adaptive teaching and listening and feedback. Obviously, the sheet music doesn't have that feedback. You have complex software that can make the sheet music with that feedback. But again, I don't see there's going to be a paradigm shift so that we convert the software so it's most efficient. Music without paper, listen, interact, evolve. That's what's basically happening. Obviously, most people working in a DAW these days, a lot of people are doing it by ear. Classic musicians are saying, hey, that's not the way you do it. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know you don't know the theory behind it. But they can do it, right? They can do it by ear because you're listening to it and you're looking at the shapes and you're figuring that out. And and we should be making the logic easier for them to do it. We shouldn't have the logic complex as though they're playing a piano when they're working in a DAW, right? The logic should should be easy, specific to the DAW system, so they can do it by ear. And then if we used a modal-based center with a 7-note system, like permanent Nashville number system with the other 5 notes as a 0.5, then they can just say, this is the collection of notes I'm working in. This is the tonic, the one of the 7 notes that is the tonic. And then you could just play. That's enough to do the theory. That's way cleaner